welcome everyone. I'm Richard Kim. I'm a GP at Galaxy Interactive. We've been one of the most active investors in the early stage space, investing in video games, interactive entertainment, and the technology supporting the next wave of fun. Here with me, I have several panelists. Let's have some pretty short introductions. Fan, you want to start?
Yeah, my name is Fan. I'm the VP of Games at Dapper. So that includes Dapper Sports Studio, Dapper Wallet, and Flow Blockchain. I have over a decade experience in gaming. Used to work at Riot Games, Amazon Luna. So I'm a lifelong gamer. And I'm super excited to be here, even though I might not look as enthusiastic right now because I'm on my 5 a.m. brain. But I'll try to stay focused.
Hi, I'm Robert Norton, founder CEO of Verisart. We're also one of the portfolio companies for Galaxy. We started in 2015 with utilizing the blockchain to help creators create better certification standards for physical works, and we now run the leading app on Shopify for brands, merchants, and creators to either token gate, mint NFTs, sell NFTs, or certify their works. We have a creator community of about 35,000. We do creator verification through Verisart. And prior to that, I ran Saatchi Art, founded Saatchi Art and Sedition Art, so come from the art tech background.
Hi, my name is Johannes. I'm the CEO and co-founder of NFT Port. So in a nutshell, we're a bit like Stripe or AWS for NFTs. So an NFT infrastructure. We're 30,000 developers building and over 500 NFT projects launched to date. And we mainly focus and care about large-scale end consumer applications being built with NFTs. So it might be marketplaces, games, wallets, social media applications, etc.
Cool. So I'm assuming the audience is fairly familiar with what an NFT is, and we don't have to spend too much time on that. The way I like to think about it is it's a digital signature pointing to some media, and that underlying media can be anything, and it can either be held in a centralized way or relatively on-chain. So there's many gradations of this stuff that span art, culture, music, fashion, pretty much everything. And I think it's precisely because it's so broad that it makes conversations around NFTs somewhat difficult. Much of the popular conception of what NFTs are has been dominated by things like Apes, which is the title of this panel. I think it's worthwhile to start off by recapping what everyone knows are the benefits of NFTs, right, in terms of ownership, in terms of royalties, in terms of composability, all of these things. But I think the interesting place to start out is actually a point Justin made 2 panels ago in his talk where I think he said something like, ownership is a meme. I think that's a very interesting point, and one that particularly the game developers in the room. I first came to Slush 3 years ago, and I was talking about crypto gaming, and no one would take me seriously. One particularly notable CEO who will go unnamed of a public company went on a 5-minute I hate blockchain kind of rant. And so I think it's useful to address that up front. Is ownership overrated? Does it miss the point? Or is it really core to what this is about? Anyone want to take that?
Just thinking as you were sort of asking that question, I was at the historic NFT conference that, believe it or not, now exists in Barcelona a few weeks ago, and there were a lot of the kind of a counterparty crew, and Joe Looney and the kind of Rare Pepe community, and the Pepe obviously was one of the earliest kind of NFTs, and very much really started as a meme, right? People were able to sort of effectively build their own Pepes and sort of like then add value in terms of like what they could do or couldn't do. And so I do think that that was sort of, I think, an early kind of marking point. And obviously then we entered into much more engineered 10K drops, right? The kind of CryptoPunks and the kind of Bored Apes. And what's interesting, if you look at the debate around royalties right now, which I know we're going to come on to, it's actually the Bored Apes that have kind of one of the lowest kind of royalty payouts, compared to art blocks, which I know you're going to talk about a little bit later, that have sustained a kind of much higher royalty payout, closer to around 7% versus like under 1% or 1.2%, I think, for Bored Apes. So I think they sort of have attracted different types of people to the market, speculators more than collectors. So I think the badge of ownership really has to kind of come back to what type of person are we talking about? I think from a collector perspective, or somebody that really wants to define themselves as part of the community, I would agree with you. I think from a speculator perspective, it's probably less of a concern.
I would like to add here as well that I come from a country neighbor to Finland, Estonia, which was occupied by the Soviet Union until 1991. And until that point, we didn't have any private property. Everything was basically owned by a socialist communist state. And if you think about large part of our days we spend between digital screens in a digital economy, and if you ask what do we truly own there, then most of those digital economies not owned by us, but it's owned by big data monopolies. So if one compares that existing internet to an internet which is more citizen-owned internet, then this is the true promise of NFTs. And that's one of the very core reasons that why we're building an NFT port.
I think from my perspective, ownership is definitely important, but the key question is not, is ownership important or not? The key question is, what do you do with it when you own it? Right? And an example that I love, and I talk to my friends all the time, is CryptoKitty. When Dapper Lab created CryptoKitty years ago, it blew up, and it was just a cat breeding game, nothing special about it. But what is fascinating is that the community started to build all these different kitty apps. Kitty racing app, kitty Tinder app, right? Kitty hat app. So you, as an owner of the CryptoKitty, you can take your NFT, you can go to these different apps, play them, engage them, interact with the community, and based on those interactions, the value of your kitty goes up, and then you might resell it at a higher price. So ownership is important, but what is more important is what do you do with ownership? Because simply owning something without utility, in my opinion, is not as valuable as doing something with it.
Yeah, one thing I think about a lot is, in a box, all things being equal, ownership is obviously a valuable primitive. But there comes a point at which this is a double-edged sword, and the extrinsic motivators of financialization and trading dwarf the intrinsic motivators of why communities form in the first place. I remember, looking at Sandbox and asking as many 12-year-olds as I could to play it and tell me how they felt about it. And in my jaded brain, it's like, oh, isn't this so cool? You're earning these tokens, you own these, these worlds, you can sell these goods. And all the kids wanted was to find redstone, like the electricity of the world, the living world, which they found was being hindered by, the idea of scarcity as opposed to abundance. And so I think that's, something that goes to a question I think about a lot in the NFT space, which is why, for something that's supposed to be so empowering, does trading NFTs or owning NFTs feel so dehumanizing? And what can we do about that to get in a wider audience?
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I would probably add it as a natural progression of the technology, meaning if you very much see NFTs first wave being like digital art and collectibles, and that by its nature is very scarce. Artists is very much, and what we're seeing at the moment is a lot of the games are building with NFTs, a lot of gaming companies, a lot of social media, creator platforms are adopting NFTs. So long-term, majority of data, especially user-generated content, will be NFTs. So I guess we are sort of, if we probably like fast-track 3 to 5 years, then we're probably, number of NFTs created, we're just at the beginning of this exponential curve. And as NFTs expand into new, more data forms and applications, that will quickly change, I believe.
In my mind, there will probably be two important issues that we need to overcome for NFT to become mainstream. One is utility. I briefly talk about it. Another example that I can give is Dapper. We partnered with San Jose Shark team and Ticketmaster to release a number of NFT for the people who come to the game. And these NFT give them gated access, offline VIP treatment, right, and many, many different benefits. I think these kind of real utility of NFT is how we're going to kind of bring in another million, another billion user into Web3. The second issue that we need to overcome is onboarding. Now, this is very difficult to solve because we talk about wallet, you talk about non-custodial wallet, self-custody wallet, right? So for us to onboard 1 billion Web2 users, the onboarding has to be seamless. But when the onboarding becomes seamless, we have trade-off, right? It's not going to be as decentralized. It's not going to be as ownership or control as opposed to the Web3 native people believe. But these are the two things that I believe we need to overcome to really make NFT mainstream.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the comment about why it feels dehumanizing, I wanted to try and unpick that. What did you mean by that?
I think one thing I think about a lot, I mean, in my former role, I was the COO of FX and EM trading at Goldman and JP for 6 years. And I dealt with this in the retail foreign exchange construct when retail traders, an ESMA study showed that 93% of retail FX traders lose money. And I often think about the same for NFTs, right? Like you go on crypto Twitter, and it seems like everyone's making money except you. And I think when I talk to smart macro guys about the NFT space, they view it very simply. They're like, this was just a very simple byproduct of 0% rates lasting for way too long, and Dogecoin, Shiba, NFTs, all of these things blowing out to clearly unsustainable levels, right? And so whether you agree with that or not, I think the question I ask myself is, if this is all about bringing sovereignty back to the individual in the form of private property as this ownership primitive, is retail even ready to be able to think like that, right? And we'll get to gaming and art and specific use cases in a bit, but take gaming, right? Like if you're a user and you're double-clicking IAP in Clash, you don't want to think, oh my gosh, is this a bad investment decision? You just want to play the game and be immersed in the game, right? So I think there's a certain tension here, and I'm curious whether retail is ready for such a financialized instrument.
I mean, I would sort of zoom out even more and say, is the infrastructure around NFTs kind of ready to create compelling consumer experiences? And so, if you look at the kind of, in some ways, I talked about this a few weeks ago, like the parallel in a way with e-commerce back in 2000. Back then, the physical infrastructure wasn't really ready. It wasn't that really different to buying something through a mail order catalog. It was actually probably a bit more of a pain in terms of going through the checkout experience. And then it took several weeks for it to come. You didn't really have any idea when it was showing up. I think like with NFTs today, you have some sort of parallels where you've got sort of similar to like the meager participation levels with e-commerce back in 2000. You've got very meager participation levels in terms of NFT ownership. You've got a sort of overvaluation in terms of a lot of the businesses in the space. I think it's a parallel to sort of the pets.com implosion kind of back then. And then the reality is it was just a bad consumer experience. And with regards to NFTs, one of the big challenges is that it has become such a financial product because there isn't really a great consumer experience when you have the NFT. And games are now being seen as potentially that contextual framework which will create a better consumer experience. But I also think, there's been a lot that despite the crash this year, that you're seeing really mainstream brands starting to enter the space. Obviously, like Flo did the Ticketmaster announcement, which means that, you know, I can imagine very soon you'll just get an NFT whether you like it or not as part of your concert ticket. You look at what Universal Studios are doing with like free kind of POAP style, you know, NFTs when you go around the park. You look at Starbucks and Polygon's announcement. I think that what we're starting to see is a new generation of like NFTs, which will be more retail friendly because they'll have more meaning within the context that person already understands. Doesn't mean they'll necessarily be highly traded collectible assets, which is kind of what we saw in this sort of first phase. So I think that, and specifically what we're doing at Verisart is we're focusing now almost majority of our efforts around our Shopify app, because we really fundamentally believe that just in the same way, and again, the e-commerce analogy is a good one, that you saw this huge pool of trust in like eBay at the beginning because people just didn't trust putting their credit card in other sites. You've seen these huge pools of trust in places like you know, Dapper's initiatives or OpenSea and other kind of like really good centralized kind of nodes of trust. But as people feel more comfortable, you'd expect the creators to kind of benefit from just doing things on their own domain level. And that's like our belief moving forward.
How do you think, what space are we going to see NFTs enter the mainstream dialogue so that it's not this 0.1% hyper-financialized trading game, but something that, you know, affects a wider swath of the population? And, you know, we can talk about the specific infrastructure to get there, but let's start with the asset class first. Which asset class are you guys most bullish on individually?
I think there are two. One is definitely gaming, because in the video game world, asset has been digital for over 2 decades. And play to earn is actually not new in the PC world. The Korean developer and also World of Warcraft, they have been doing it for over 15 years. So I think gaming will probably be the easiest segment to really utilize NFT and onboard user. The second area that I see is creator. So creator today, individual artist, individual influencer, a lot of the economic power today is controlled by the platform, by Twitch, by YouTube, right, by Spotify. And I think the individual creator will be able to use NFT to really drive economic benefit from themselves and really bypass the middle platform to engage with their community and potentially pass the economy back to their community and fans.
Yeah, I would echo the second point, especially in terms of, if you think about mass adoption, hundreds of millions of users, all the way up into billions, then we see social media platforms, Reddit, Instagram, Meta. There's obviously, you know, from Google side, they have announced, not like fully in terms of longer-term roadmaps, but they're working on it. So, and I think for end consumer, the aha moment will come not in terms of, you know, thinking NFTs as a financial product or that I have ownership or some digital asset, but it unlocks new user experiences for them. So might it be in terms of gaming, you know, I can actually, you know, take my items to another game potentially. In terms of social media, imagine you could, let's say you're a creator on YouTube today, you have built up your fan base, but you're still locked into YouTube. You can't cross your fan base to different social media platform. Imagine if you could do that. That's a sort of a new unlock that NFTs enable because they're interoperable. And if sort of a lot of the different players come together and agree on the terms of we want to move towards that direction, what we're seeing in terms of like the whole industry is going towards, especially from creator platforms, because there is a lot of compression from macro perspective that the ad revenue models have come down, and for a lot of large enterprises, especially creator platforms, they're looking for new revenue streams, and NFTs is one. It has sort of from GMV perspective, it has GMV into billions, so there is this validation point. So if I would have to make a prediction, next 12 to 24 months, hundreds of millions of users, I would make that prediction on creator platforms.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the last great opportunity for creators was Web2, social video, the amount of kind of influencers, podcasters, online courses that those technologies enabled, and you get to sort of this 50 million active creator number. And I think the promise of Web3 is that you can actually get that to 250 million, 300 million. And the thing, I agree that, predominantly games is an online environment, but with creators, what we've noticed is that they really don't want to just be defined as like digital creators or NFT creators or crypto art creators. Many of them have like physical and digital parts of their practice. And we're starting to see that come full circle. We invested heavily for the first 4 years in just focusing on the physical space, as you know, and now moved equally aggressively into the sort of digital space. But what we're sort of starting to see is that creators will increasingly start thinking about token gating. So if they already have an existing NFT community, we did something just last month with Johnny Depp and his 3,500 NFT holders. They had an ability to redeem their token for a signed print. They had to pay for it. But mapping that relationship between what the token ID's status is, like has it been redeemed, has it not been redeemed? I think this sort of like complexity of the digital versus the physical, which has traditionally sort of been, I think, held back the market adoption because it has been oppositional, I think will start to become more inclusive. And this complexity will start to get mapped by players in the space, which I think will make people feel more confident about like what exactly is this token mean to them? Does it give them something? Has that redemption right already been exercised? And then if they don't have communities, you'll be able to provide something just as part of a physical purchase or a ticket purchase. So I do think that we're going to see a lot more interaction between these two kind of worlds of physical and digital, which I think will aid more mainstream adoption. And from my own perspective, we still feel very bullish around collectibles, particularly where there's a living creator presence, and that sort of like signature, to your point, wants to be verified, wants to be part of that verifiable ownership.
How are we doing on time, by the way?
It says we've got
we
no
out?
time, but
We're out of time.
I'm not sure. I think we started a bit late. I don't think the time has started, but maybe someone
I
could.
think we're just on time.
Let's ask one more question, which is around this hot topic of royalties. So one of the biggest benefits of NFTs is supposed to be that creators, artists get a share of secondary royalties, but the problem is, as we've recently discovered, royalties are not generally enforceable at the smart contract level, but at the marketplace level. So how big of an issue do you foresee that being in each of your respective fields, and what do you think is going to be done about it as a practical matter?
I'm happy to take this because it's something we've really, we actually posted about it today, and I think OpenSea just updated their position yesterday. But for people who haven't been kind of following this, about November 8th, OpenSea announced effectively that they were going to create a blacklist for a number of the marketplaces that were kind of competing with them on a transaction level, like LooksRare and others. There are sort of 4 or 5 marketplaces, I think, that they've announced. And the reason for that is if you look in the month of November, 90% of royalties were paid out by OpenSea, but they did less than 50% of trading volume. So what was happening is that they were just basically losing market share, and also wanting to sort of like find a way that they could differentiate themselves. And they announced basically a pretty old school kind of approach, which is that we're going to create a gating function within the contract level that's basically going to point to a lookup table that we're going to maintain centrally. And I think it's a really, I think there's 2 things I want to say about it. The first is we absolutely believe in creator royalties. I think that's one of the exciting reasons why creators enter the space and why we can do things differently in a Web3 world than we can in a Web2 world. So that's just kind of a philosophical standpoint. But in terms of a practical one, I think it does really, to your point, show the limits of actually what decentralized infrastructure can enforce. Because it is not a Web3 sort of solution to maintain an off-chain registry that one company is in control of. That I think would go against like a lot of the philosophies of why people entered the space. But look, it's similar with creator verification. If you actually want to deal with meaningful creator verification, like government identity is a pretty good way to do that. And at the moment, that's not easily done on chain. So I think the jury's out as to like how we're going to handle it, but I do think it's important to recognize that if you want a good user experience, or if you want to build trust, or if you want to actually be able to verify creators or ensure that creators kind of get royalties, there are some limitations of where the tech is at the moment.
Great. I guess 1 or 2 questions before we wrap up. Let's start here. Right here, in the front, yeah.
Hi, for Diaper Labs. So I'm actually a builder on Flow blockchain. 3 months ago, we launched our NFT composable platform, and we received 10,000 wallets registration the first day. What Diaper Labs said was a lie to us. So you guys received $725 million for supporting your ecosystem and for supporting your creators. You do not give me any single support, all right? Yeah, and the thing is, like, all the NBA Top Shop users cannot transfer to us. When you said that all NBA Top Shop, you have like tons of wallets and you're like #1 transaction on the whole blockchain, it's a lie as well. And you have no ability to onboard Web2 people. And I know that your organization is really messed up right now.
Okay. I'd suggest we take this offline. Can we take the next question? Over here.
Over there. Hey guys. So first of all, I'm a big fan of all of you guys actually. And yeah, one of the things I'm always wondering, right? Like, if we are trading like ERC20 token, then we can consider it's like trading stock, right? But if we are trading like NFT, and why it is a taboo is because maybe Richard would understand is because I think of it as trading like ETN, because the value of the asset is always going to 0, because the limitation of the utilities of that asset, which is the NFT, always reach a certain limitation. Because, and in our opinion, and I agree with Johannes and Robert as well, because the existing infrastructure for the utilities of the NFTs are not there. And I think that the biggest reason is because most of the creation of the NFTs are very decentralized. But the utilities of the NFTs are very centralized. And it is controlled by, you know, Dapper Labs and Flow layer 1, and then, you know, maybe like Solana layer 1, Avalanche layer 1. All these layer 1, they create the utilities in a very silo way. And every time there's a project that wants to have like a cross-chain or like a cross-platform creation, it's very hard to do it. So what do you guys think the solution here? Because if we keep doing, or like we keep building, you know, like a silo for every single layer 1, the utilities of the NFTs will never reach like its full potential, and the value of the asset, just like ET, and it will always go to 0.
Yeah,
all right, thanks.
I actually have a very different view from that, which is I actually think the blockchain matters very little ultimately. You know, what really matters, because NFTs are locally scarce depending on the context in which they're presented, but globally infinite, right? And so the problem is you have a potentially infinite digital good that you need to make valuable in some local context, right? And so that and the mainstream audience has not yet been brought in. And I think that's the real problem. Ultimately, I see these as many, many islands. Like each game publisher is probably going to do its equivalent of OP craft, right? Where, you know, they have their own chain, and whether those objects are valuable, it depends on whether you've built a fun experience in that context. Whether Instagram NFTs work will depend on how well those NFTs show up from a status standpoint and make them desirable or not. No one's asking, is this on Matic or is it on Solana or any of these questions? They just don't matter. Yeah, well, and then final thought on the utility point, people always say NFTs need utility. I actually think also somewhat differently from that, because if an NFT is just about utility, and you see this with the brands that are coming in, then the NFT is just like a digital coupon, right? There's no trading for that good because its price is known. Like if I go and redeem an NFT for a chip, a bag of chips, then that NFT should be worth a bag of chips, right? So I think the types of NFTs I like are those that don't purely reduce to utility. Now, I'm not saying utility doesn't matter, but the thing can't just purely reduce to utility. So I think a lot about primary versus secondary volumes. And as we analyze marketplaces or other things, I see a lot of platforms that are likely to lead to high primary sales, but have a horrible secondary market because there's just no liquidity of what I call like snap judgments. And a lot of that is more on the speculative side as opposed to the utility side. So there's this strange balancing act that has to happen where you don't need utility, but it could be good. But ultimately, what you really need is a lot of disagreement, actually, on what this thing is worth and a liquid market around that.
Yeah, so hey guys, I'm Dell's building, Web3 product lead at some companies. One of the products we're building is a marketplace for interactive beats NFTs. So we see music, particularly beats, not songs, as having very, very strong utility as NFTs. So what are your thoughts on beats, not songs, and utility long term?
I'll just quickly share my thoughts because I've looked at a lot of music NFT platforms. I'm just going to repeat one thing I just said. So this liquidity of snap judgment. The problem with, say, 3-minute music NFTs in my mind, as opposed to something like, I don't know, generative art, which I'll talk about later, is you can't have a bunch of people looking at that thing and in 5 seconds saying, oh, that looks rare, that doesn't, because they have to actually listen to the underlying track. So this kind of relates to what I was saying about utility versus kind of collectible or speculative value. And if it takes 3 minutes to form a judgment on whether this thing is valuable or not, how much secondary volume are you going to really drive? That's not to say music NFTs as marketplaces are not interesting, but I think the vast majority of volume for these things is going to be concentrated in the primary. And the problem with marketplaces that have, say, a 90-to-10 ratio on primary to secondary is they become liquidity sinks, and you can't kind of recycle your capital. And to date, all of those billions of dollars in NFT volumes you're seeing are a function of secondary volumes outweighing primary. So that transition from a primarily secondary traded market to a primarily primary traded market is going to be interesting to think about.
I think we have time for one more over here. Amazing. And then we'll have to move on.
I just want to add actually something about the music question, because I agree with what Rich was saying, but I was on a panel at NFT London a week ago, and actually there was a musician there that had financed his last album through NFTs. And so I think that from terms of creator tooling, in order to be able to think about how do you, again, build new types of relationships with your community, I think it's challenging, but there are people out there doing it. And it was thanks to NFTs that he was able to release a new album.
And also like to add, as many of you can see here, there's a ton of different use cases for NFTs, a lot of them being innovated today. And it is very much sort of an analogy of, if you look back 1995, how people describe internet. But there's also the ability to first principle analyze, what were the core characteristics of internet, which was you could take physical information and move it at the speed of light, and after that you could have e-commerce, basically facilitate commerce on top of that. What NFTs first principle provide is ownership, interoperability, and also they have business model inside them. And so there's a lot of different applications, use cases, et cetera, available long term. And probably looking back 5 to 10 years from now, it might be that today what we're speaking here is only 5%, just like it was with the early internet.
Yeah, hi. How do you see NFTs as a government token compared to normal ERC-20 tokens? And there's a couple of projects that uses this concept. I don't know if you know Nouns, DAO, WTF. They have a treasury of around, I think, 40 to 50 million at the moment, and a floor price of, I think, 80 ETH. So how do you think NFTs are compared to normal ERC-20 government tokens?
I think personally, Nouns DAO is the most interesting project in that space to me. That class of projects where you own an NFT, you have a membership in a DAO. The DAO has to figure out its reason for being. The evolution of on-chain governance in that project is really interesting. So I think it's definitely going to be a case study for this broader question, which I think is missing in the NFT space, which is how do we go from I and ownership to we and what we can do together as a self-sovereign collective.
Yeah. I would add that that's also a fascinating space in gaming, because I remember when we were at Riot Games, we spent so much time going on Reddit and just collect player feedback and figure out, oh, should we buff this champion? You know, should we like change this stat champion? But then we ran into a situation where what kind of decision you will actually let the community decide, and what kind of decision that we absolutely need to control as a game developer, because we have the game designer and we know how the game meta. And I think the government tokens in gaming space is in this exploration phase that every gaming company, they're trying to figure out what can I let the community and DAO decide, what should I control. But I do believe probably in a year or two, we'll see a couple of great examples coming from the gaming space that really kind of teach us and showcase us how to use government token effectively in the Web3 gaming space.